Our foremost concern is protecting Jehovah's organization.
Hello everybody. Oh, have we got a video for you. My goodness. Make some popcorn. This video has everything. Liars, scammers, fraud, money laundering, abuse, harassment, illegal activities, adultery. I mean, you name it. You name it. My goodness. And it shows how insidious the organization is and how they try their best to shut up whistleblowers. And I want to thank John very much, because without him this story would not get out. And I know many of you who have been in this community for a while. We left in 2012. We woke up about October 2012, and we heard about the Menlo Park Scandal. Most of us have. And we didn't have the full story. You know, we always knew, oh, it was like a hostile takeover, and, you know, Watchtower and the circuit overseer went in there and they got rid of some elders, and those elders were disfellowshipped and became apostates. Well, now I'm here to tell the rest of the story, and I want to thank John very much. He sent me a video, and so I am going to be like interrupting his video and talking about some of this stuff. But he is the son and brother of two of the original. There was 3 elders that were involved in the Menlo Park Scandal, and that were disfellowshipped, removed, and they were marked as apostates. And what these families have been through is horrible, horrible. This has been going on for 15 years. Many of us thought, oh, the case was dismissed, that was it, that was the end of it. No, there is so much more. I mean, the intrigue, I mean, like I said, make popcorn. So, and of course the clip I played at the opening, I know, we play that a lot. But that clip is so true. Watchtower will protect the organization no matter what. And I know there's going to be some, oh, Mike and Kim, they're just conspiracy theorists, tinfoil hat wearing nutters. Yeah, I've been called that for years. We've been called that for years. Like we keep saying, but what do we know? But I appreciate, you know, you trusting us with this information, John. And he sent me receipts. So, like I said, make some popcorn and get your favorite drink, because this is going to be very eye-opening and shocking to many of you.
I'm making this video for Kim and Mikey Brooks. My name is John David Cobb Jr., Jonathan David Cobb Jr., the son of Jonathan David Cobb Sr., who is one half of the Menlo Park 2. I'm kind of nervous making this video, but I have to kind of guide you through some things so you can understand what was going on and the documents that I sent you. Now, I was gonna sue the Watchtower myself personally. I was putting together a suit because I'm not baptized. I mean, I'm the son of an elder. I grew up in and around the truth, but I'm not baptized. So they seem to treat me a little differently. I noticed over the years. In a nutshell, the case was dismissed. That's what everybody knows. That's what everybody thinks. But that was 15 years ago, and it became a Cold War. We've been fighting them ever since, and they have been doing stuff to us. It's been, like I said, a back and forth Cold War. You're probably wondering, why am I coming forward now? Because Arlen St. Clair, the other half of the Menlo Park 2, he's dead. And I just feel people should know what we've dealt with behind the scenes from the so-called loving brotherhood of the Watchtower. That's such bullshit. And I'm sorry, this is probably going to be explicit in some areas, but I've been walking around with this stuff for 15 years. And everywhere I went to try to report a crime, every agency I went to did everything to cover it up and help the Watchtower. They have their tentacles in everything. Court systems, hospitals, with every municipality of every city in the United States, there's someone who's connected to the Watchtower. And ironically, a lot of the people that they're connected to aren't Jehovah's Witnesses, but they're still loyal to them. And what connects them is Freemasonry. The Watchtower has been infiltrated by Freemasonry. Now, I say that, and you're probably thinking, duh, but other people out there are thinking, yeah, the Watchtower is, the evidence is irrefutable, but when we started this at the beginning in 2010, we didn't know half of what we know now. And like I said, this story needs to be told because of what the Watchtower, the behind the scenes dirty tricks that they use, and how they turn your friends and your family against you, and you know, I mean, if it's not a cult, what is it? Well, it's not a cult technically, but those are other things that we'll get into along the way. I don't know how long this is going to be. I don't mind if you show this to anyone and edit it any way that you see fit. I'm just trying to save people a lot of time. I have collected a lot of evidence and documents, and the Watchtower seems to be careful of me. And that's why I felt a lawsuit with just my name on it would, you know, crack this thing wide open. But anyway, we filed the case in August of 2010. It was C-39, -10-3907 MEJ, Maria Elena James. Now, if you recall, they had someone helping them out whose name was John Steele. That was me. I used an alias name, not because I was avoiding the courts or anything like that, because I had a previous history with Judge James, and I didn't want that to have a bearing over the case. So I always opted to use an alias, my pen name. In the real world, I'm a writer, and I use my pen name to keep my writing life separate from, you know, my regular life. My father required that. Anyway, I knew her background. She was a fraud investigator, so I knew her background. She was the perfect judge for the case. I didn't want her to recuse herself in any way. And that's where John Steele came from. We filed the case I told initially the strategy that we designed. I came up with. I told them that the only way we can make anything stick is if we come at them with criminal charges. That they really had no knowledge of the law whatsoever. And I had a little bit of knowledge that I picked up over the years from various other endeavors. I wrote up the original lawsuit, the original drafts, but they thought the language was too harsh. So they gave it to my brother, Jason Cobb, who's also an elder. He was in the background. He became a factor later. And then we got to really understand how the Watchtower is so sinister. You would never think that there was a sinister side to the Watchtower, but there is. Anyway, it started with this circuit overseer who came to the congregation, and he was trying to bully his way into everything, and he was seeking all kinds of gifts and accolades and just, he wanted to be showered with attention. He kept telling people, he was an ex-Navy SEAL, and how he gave his life to Jehovah, and blah, 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 blah. And I asked my mother if she had a photo, because usually what she does is take pictures around the Kingdom Hall, and sometimes she'll show the photos to people and say, remember this? And just a source of joy, I guess. I asked if she had a photo. She showed me the photo, and I knew immediately he couldn't be a Navy SEAL. I have friends who are Navy SEALs, and that's how I got his record. I pulled his military record, which you'll see that in a file called Kohler Military Record. I had his file pulled and found out that he has never served in the military at all. You'll see that document, and you'll see the attached email that I got back from the records officer. I knew I was kind of crossing the line, and I'm not going to say how I'm connected or how I know a Navy SEAL. I'm not going to go into that. But that's how I was able to pull the record. It was placed under a Freedom of Information heading, so it couldn't trace back to anyone in specific, because I kind of had the feeling that the Watchtower was vindictive. And that's where a lot of this started. And I held on to his military record. I showed only a couple of people, but I was really just trying to expose him as a liar. He had been lying his whole career as a circuit overseer, telling people he was a decorated war hero, but how he gave his life to Jehovah and all this. And I thought, this man has gotten so much advantage in life off of stolen valor. And I remember when we got into court and we were in chambers, and I told Smith, the attorney of record, I said, because Kohler had been tampering with witnesses. Everyone in the Kingdom Hall, when he came on his his visit, or whatever you call it, circuit overseer visit, when he came to Menlo Park, it was all about, making sure that everything was status quo, that he was still in control. And a lot of that was based on his non-existent military record. And I'm thinking, after being a circuit overseer for 30, 40, 50 years, the Watchtower had to know. Because that's the funny thing about the Watchtower. That's why they call it the Watchtower. Because they're watching you, literally. And there was from that point on, he had decided the congregation was going to be merged. And my father, being the elder at the time, and Arlen, They said, no, there's no reason why it should be merged. And they said, we don't want to be merged, okay? And our Kingdom Hall was unique in that it was purchased by a then elder when I was a kid. So it was the building and the land. It pretty much was owned by the people of the congregation, and that's when Mikey said, when Vern said in his video it was a hostile takeover. It really was. It was very hostile. There was a lot of false documents being filed with the city, and we found out then that what it means when they say, just do what you're told. Even if you don't understand, just have faith and do what you're told. Yeah, so if somebody walks in and says, I want you to file this document for me, and mum's the word, they'll do it. And that's what we found out. They talked Kingdom Hall merger, and my father just said no. He said the people don't want to be merged, and it's not necessary. Fiscally, it's not necessary. Economically, it's just not necessary. He couldn't see a reason why they would want to merge the Kingdom Halls. So he put up resistance, and then eventually they just said, this is going to happen, whether you like it or not. And that's when it became a problem. And they resisted, of course, to the end, because in their minds, they practically owned the Kingdom Hall. It wasn't one of those society-sponsored Kingdom Halls. So, Breedy and his crew came in, Ernest Breedy, and Larry Lavender, Contreras, Showers, Donald Showers, and they came in like a wrecking crew, they just took over. They filed papers of incorporation behind my brother's back, and my brother Jason was actually the presiding overseer, so he handled all that. But what we didn't know is it was all about money. Because they couldn't, what they were doing was, whenever they had a large transfer that came through, a large sum of money, they would take my brother's name off of the account so that it wouldn't generate a statement to him. They would push the money through the account. Once it cleared, they would put his name back on the account. And because the transaction already happened, at the time it happened, he wasn't on the account. So therefore, he didn't know, he would never know that transactions were being pushed. But he looks like he's the fall guy if someone was to audit the account or check the account. And when we discovered that, they were doing this because Contreras' son was the manager of Wells Fargo Bank. I don't remember his name. I have it somewhere in my records. My place is a mess, but yeah, that's how they were getting transactions pushed through. But it was generating so many SARS reports, suspicious activity report, that Contreras' son, he was the manager of the bank, but he couldn't keep it quiet for too much longer. So that's really why they wanted to oust my dad and my brother. They were pushing money through. We didn't know at the time that they were doing it. They seem to have a little private club that benefits from fraud and corruption. That's what we found out, that there's an underlying current within the congregation of corruption, and masking it as a good brother or a good elder, or it's just but we'll get to that. So anyway, when it became necessary, they made all kinds of calls to the headquarters but couldn't get anybody. And finally, the lawsuit was just a last resort. It was like shooting up a flare. That's what they thought. I knew it was going to be more than that. And so I had tried to steer it along to a degree. I told them initially we would have to come at them with criminal charges. And the only thing that covered this whole enterprise was a RICO statute. So that's where my brother came in. He was a kind of a RICO special. He knew a lot about RICO. That's because he's worked in Silicon Valley all his life, and with all the technical espionage and secrets being stolen, you got to know about that stuff. So that's why he knew about RICO. I had a little bit of knowledge because, I've been to prison, and that's going to come out. And I been in San Quentin, Folsom, and Susanville, 3 of the toughest prisons in California. And I'm full disclosure. I'm just saying it will come out anyway. They will try to use it against me. I don't care. I've been through too much. I've lost too much. Everybody's lost something. It'll be for nothing. So, full disclosure. Anyway, we filed the lawsuit as a flare. We were shooting off, and we just wanted to get someone in attention, someone in authority, because we kept getting these form letters but nobody would ever sign them. It would just say from the service desk, SDG. Who's SDG? I had mentally started keeping tabs of those things, those strange anomalies. But it came down to, one day my father and Arlen, came to me and said, "Okay, we're gonna do this. We have no choice." And I said, "Okay." I said, "But you do know you're going through a door. Once you go through that door, you're walking into a world of hurt, and there ain't no turning back." And my father looked at me and he said, "Yeah, let's do it anyway." And not long after that, we filed the lawsuit. August 2010, I think it was I don't know what day it was, but they filed it, and it was the first lawsuit ever filed that had criminal charges attached to it. We found out later. So we kind of made history. We weren't trying to. They were just humble men who didn't understand why nobody was listening, or nobody was. It was just all so cold and efficient. And there were some racial things played into it, but I'll get to all that too. But for the first couple of weeks, the first week, nothing happened. And I remember there was like a JW chat room, and I just went into the chat room and I dropped the case number. And after that, it kind of, it's kind of like throwing a pebble in a pond, the ripple effect. And everyone was all over us, and everyone wanted to, help out. And the ex-JW community was very disorganized, not like it is today, where it's very streamlined. And if one gets some information, they pass it on to another, and it's really nice. But it was a while before we got a real response from the Watchtower. They kind of had this attitude of, "Oh, they're suing us. Oh, we don't care." They were very smug, and they don't practice what they preach. What they preach is for the rank and file, but what they believe and what they do is something different. And I think we've all seen that, and you can make excuses all you want, but I think that's how it really is with the Watchtower. But all hell didn't break loose really until they got their summonses and the court date was quickly approaching, and that's when all of a sudden they want to talk to them. Oh, brother, you don't have to do this. You could just tell us what's wrong and we will assist you and all that. That's bullshit. They're not going to assist you. They just want to keep it quiet. Keep any hint of scandal from getting out. Because when it's all said and done, it's a business. If you have a logo, then you have a business. So when you see that little blue Watchtower logo, that's their business. It's their brand, and all they care about is protecting it. That's what we found out, or what I found out. Is I never got baptized. I couldn't explain to you why I didn't get baptized. It was just, but I was privy to everything growing up. So I had a very unique perspective. I was worldly, but I grew up as one of Jehovah's Witnesses, or as the son of an elder who is one of Jehovah's Witnesses. So that gave me a very unique perspective from both sides. And I have really kind of cherished that experience. It's helped me a lot. It's hurt me a lot. But after the first court date, they were trying to get him to drop it. They were promising him everything, and then when he said no, he wasn't going to drop it, and other things were happening in the background also. This is to the backdrop of Candace Conti. She was in the courthouse like a block away, so we would just miss each other. She comes out of the courthouse, we come out of underground parking, and we miss her. But she was an inspiration to me especially. They threatened us. They did everything to get us to back down, and then when we wouldn't back down, then the Watchtower machine started. By that time, Circuit Officer Kohler had returned. He was telling people not to cooperate with subpoenas. He was telling people not to answer questions. He was telling people to plead the fifth. He was telling people, perjure yourself if you have to, but give them nothing. And keep in mind, I have his military record, and we're going to court now. So I pulled Smith to the side at one of the conferences, and I told him, you need to tell Mr. Kohler to keep his mouth shut. He's tampering with potential witnesses. And Anthony Smith, the attorney of record for the Watchtower, said, he's a little fat but black man. He looked chocolate Santa. And he's about 5'6" and about 280, something like that. A little chocolate bowling ball. And he looked at me and said, I'm not going to tell him nothing. And I said, if you don't put a muzzle on your dog, I will. I said, I will file this in evidence. And he looked at it and he said, what's this? So what? And I said, if I have to explain that to you, you shouldn't be here. And he didn't tell Kohler anything. And he kept gossiping and rumor milling and telling people don't cooperate with him. So I took the military record and I dispersed it on the internet. And within a few hours, it was known that he was not in the Navy SEAL. And then the next time we went to court, he was trying to file a motion to suppress, and the judge said it's already out there now. And he was very upset, and he sent me an email later on that day, and he said something to the effect of, so we're gonna play dirty, something like that. And I shot him an email back and I said, in all fairness, I told you ahead of time, I don't go after I don't do anything without telling somebody ahead of time. So if you got a problem with me, you have two choices: stop what you're doing, or prepare yourself. And I told Smith, I said, I tried to tell you, and that was like the beginning of the dirty tricks with the clerks. We had all kinds of problems with the clerks, losing documents. It got so bad that the judge had to take a 15-minute recess to go find a document that she even didn't know was filed, and it was quite embarrassing for Judge James. And it was the clerks were working against her, and that's when I found out. Ironically, that's the job of the clerk. It's the job. When I looked up the statute about clerks, it's their job to try to deny you any justice. That's their job, amongst their other duties. And I thought, wow, that's amazing. You're there to deny me access to the courthouse. But yeah, that's, and we found that the clerks were the most deadliest people to deal with. If they make the case or they can break the case. And we had a dual case running at the same time. My brother had a case, and there was a floating clerk, Karen Braca, who is a witness out of the San Mateo congregation. Well, she's dead now, but she died of a brain tumor. But she did a lot of damage before she went. I mean, there were rulings that were illegal. But I've often said I would rather stand in a courtroom in a third world country for murder than for a traffic ticket anywhere in California. That's my problem. But Karen was a floating clerk, and that's how they got things done. The clerks would file the documents, and so if the clerk's not filing a document, how does the judge know? So there's one instance where she had to take a 15-minute recess, and it was very interesting reading the court transcript, because she knew that even the clerks were trying to sabotage the case, and they were so open about it. But that's ultimately the downfall of what happened at the dismissal. And Judge James knew that someone was trying to derail the case, and she said in the record, if you look at the record, it's all got to come out. Whatever was done is going to come out. And I think after she said those words, and she had been admonishing the attorney of record, Anthony Smith, part of our RICO case, hinged on some bank documents from Citibank and a couple of other banks. And Watchtower was furious how we knew about these accounts, and as they were pushing the money through the accounts, and they were so obvious because they hide behind that First Amendment. So you can't call the police. We're handling business for the church, and they get away with it. And Judge James had said, she told Anthony Smith, we're going on Christmas break or something, some kind of vacation. She said, but if you don't have those documents turned over to Mr. Cobb and Mr. St. Clair, I will make a court order. And that's what sealed the fate. Because the next thing I know, we get a letter from the court saying the case has been dismissed. And I said, no, that's not right. That doesn't make sense. And keep in mind, I had a pass with Judge James, so I knew her to not be someone who would make some kind of offhand choice like that. I said, no, let's go to the courthouse. And me and Arlen got in the car and drove up to the courthouse. And the first thing I did was check the court calendar. She was off the court calendar She signed off the calendar, I think, for 2 weeks. She was visiting family in Michigan. And it was near the holidays, and yeah, because we got the dismissal. It was like the first week of January. I think it was January 5th. And we were scheduled to select a jury a couple of days after that. So I looked at the court calendar, and I looked at the dismissal order, and the chief clerk happened to come out in the hallway. He came out of an office, and I was in the hallway checking the court calendar, and I said, "We have a case of fraud." And he said, "What do you mean?" And I told him, I said, "I'm holding a dismissal order from Judge James. She dismissed a case, 10-3907, M.E. and J." And he's like, so he took the document and he read it. He said, "So she dismissed it. What's the big deal?" And I said, "Judges can't adjudicate cases when they're off calendar, and she's been off calendar for the last 2 weeks. This is a forgery." It was dead silent in the hallway. I mean, dead silent. Another woman came out of the office that he had come out of prior to, and she was like co-worker, assistant or something, and he's looking at the papers, and I took the liberty to tell her also what had been done, and I because I wanted more people to know, because I knew that the court was going to try to cover it up. And I said, "He's just reviewing a forged document signed by Judge James, who's off calendar, as you can see." So I told him it was Brenda Tolbert, and she was the head clerk, but we had problems with her from the get-go. She was very condescending, very arrogant. She felt because we didn't have lawyers that we shouldn't waste the court's business, waste the court's time with this foolishness, this little nothing case. She was very condescending and berating. I remember, I had a phone call. I had to call the court for some reason, and I had to ask her a question, and and I said, "Well, that doesn't sound right." And she said, "Well, how would you know, Mr. Cobb? You are not a lawyer." And she, in the end, though, her hatred for us is what caused the downfall. I proved that she forged the signature. She was allowed to resign, and I always felt bad about that, because I know that there are men that probably came through, or people who came through her courtroom that had to plead guilty because of her subterfuge or sabotage of a case, and that never sat right with me. And I always felt bad about that. Her direct supervisor was named Mary Ann Buckley. She was also dismissed. She was given, they basically let them resign. That prevented the courthouse from facing a scandal, and an investigation that it would have undoubtedly generated. And from that point on, the name Cobb is like a rash down at the courthouse, because you have to keep in mind, we weren't attorneys, and we figured out what they were doing. So it is very embarrassing to the court, very embarrassing. And so it was fraud on the court, and all they did was sweep it under the carpet. We filed an appeal in the Ninth Circuit Court a couple blocks away, and they swore on a stack of Bibles they never got the appeal. And I even remember the intake clerk's name. A little 20-something year old white girl, fresh face, fresh out of college, dreams and hopes and all that stuff, and her name was Michelle. And how do I know this unless I was there, filing the appeal? But the Ninth Circuit Court was just willing to sweep it under the carpet. Then we filed other follow-up cases, and all the follow-up cases that we filed all wound up in Judge White's court. Judge James White. You can look him up and find out yourself. He's a federal judge in Oakland, across the bay. And going from San Francisco, being a federal judge in San Francisco to Oakland, that's like going from a Ferrari to a Volkswagen. And I'll tell you what happened to him. We filed further cases because we knew they were going to try to cover it up. And every case that we filed wound up in Judge White's court. And it became clear that he was a stopgap. He was there to try to protect the watchtower. And I kept thinking, why? Why are you trying to protect the watchtower? And doing a little research, it became clear he was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York, a stone's throw away from the watchtower building. And he's not a Jehovah's Witness. And I kept thinking, what joins them? You know, but that's where I learned pedophiles cover for each other. Even if they don't know the person. If you're a fellow pedophile, they'll cover for you. And I could never understand that. Especially, you know, being in prison. A pedophile is the lowest thing you can ever be. I mean, you're going to get banged on by everybody, you know. But they seem to cover for each other. I don't know how that works, but anyway, I'm going to show you. This is a document that I want you to search for, or you can have someone find it for you. Atlantis or whoever. But anyway, his name is Judge Jeffrey White, not James White. I made a mistake. The case number is 13 CV, as in California Vehicle, 04917 JSW. Now, I've given you the court case. It's filed under the Northern District of California. I don't know if you can see this, but I get the feeling, and I want you to do it because I get the feeling that it's not there. See, that's one thing I come to realize when I heard Vern's, when he did a side piece on the Menlo Park 2, a lot of the documents are not there. They show up on the computer.
Yes, I went and looked it up, and these are the only documents I can find under those case files, or that case number, is just a couple of pages. The one is Jason Cobb versus Don Adams, November 5th, 2013. I served a true and correct copies of the attached by placing said copies in a postage. So Don Adams, the defendant, was served, but this is all that there is. There's no other documents. As far as the true and correct copies of the attached, no, there's nothing attached. This one in the United States District Court for the Northern District of California, Jason Cobb plaintiff versus Don Adams defendant. Refers the above captioned case filed on October 23rd, 2013 to the Honorable Judge Jeffrey S. White to consider whether this case is related to Cobb versus J.P. Morgan Chase Bank, case number C-13-1955, JSW. Plaintiff shall file any response in opposition to or in support of relating the cases within 7 calendar days of this order. One page, that was it. Cobb versus Adams. Case 4:13-CV 04917-JSW. United States District Court for the Northern District of California, Jason Cobb plaintiff Then they have the case number again versus order vacating hearing set for April 25th, 2014, Don Adams. Defendant. This matter is scheduled for a motion hearing on April 25th, 2014. The court has considered the parties' papers, including plaintiff's most recent submission regarding the dismissal of his criminal case, relevant legal authority, and the record in this case, and it finds the motion suitable for disposition without oral argument. The court vacates the hearing on the motions and it will decide the motions on the papers. It is so ordered, dated April 21st, 2014, Jeffrey S. White, United States District Judge. That's it. That's the only files I can find.
But if you go to get actual copies of the documents, then it's not there. And I'm going to tell you why that is. Because the courthouse has been continuously trying to keep this under wraps. And it's just sickening. And I just hope at some point the Department of Justice gets involved, because the San Francisco Federal Courthouse is the most corrupt courthouse I've ever seen. The only person in that courthouse who's not corrupt is probably the janitor and Judge James. Sorry. Just being raw. But, yeah, there was a lot of back and forth. And a lot of documents that came out. But when it was proven that they forged the judge's signature, we tried everything to get the cases back into court. But I want you to search for this document, because it doesn't exist. But in that document, it's going to have the reasons why Judge White got every case. Because see, they have it like a lottery system. You file a case on one day, a certain judge is going to get it. File a case on this day, a certain judge is going to get it. You file a case on this day, and so on and so forth. But every one we filed, no matter what day, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, whatever day, Judge White got the case. He was a stopgap to protect the watchtower. But yeah, I'll get to that. I had wrote a document and submitted it when I filed fraud on the court, and I accused Jeffrey White of being a pedophile. You don't accuse a federal judge of being a pedophile unless you can back it up. And I said, he's trying to protect the watchtower, and you won't find that document either. They have scrubbed all the documents like that. And the number one document that I think Vern probably is missing, the judge asked us to write a brief on what we thought they were doing, the scheme. And so that takes us back to the merger. They're getting free labor, and they had an account with Home Depot, an industrial account, so they're getting the material at a highly, highly discounted rate. And then when I looked at the numbers, I realized these mergers are really about laundering money. Just like the military, a hammer doesn't cost $500. A toilet doesn't cost $1,000. The watchtower routinely pads the bill so they can push money through the accounts whenever there's a merger. Whenever there's a merger, and I also would correlate it is, and this is something you can check yourself, but there seemed to be, wherever there's a congregation merger, there was high instances of pedophilia. Or it was always around a congregation that had been accused of, there was pedophilia going on. And like I said, it just seems strange that there's a merger under these circumstances, and I just knew it wasn't right, but they were pushing stuff through. The RBC, the Regional Building Committee, was more or less the Watchtower's Western Union, their own private Western Union. They were pushing money through. And I know this because my father, John Cobb Sr., he's a contractor. He's owned his own construction firm for like 40 years before he retired. So I know what wood should cost and what it should, and what it shouldn't cost. And so I wrote a document describing how, like the Golden Triangle in Vietnam, heroin to drugs, or to heroin to guns, to, it was a triangle of things. But it was seemed to be pedophilia and pedophiles and, money. And that's when I started looking at it. And what I did is I put a map up on my wall, and I just put a pin and charted all the places that I knew of pedophilia that happened. And it was very scary. Very, very scary what I discovered. And that's when I realized this database that they protect, it's not a database of victims and perpetrators. It's a resource. Follow me, if you will. During the case, there was a lawyer that got involved, and this is in the record. His name was Sinclitico. His parents were Jehovah's Witnesses. He wasn't. Why would you get involved in a case and try to help the Watchtower and help the attorney of record, Anthony Smith? Why would you get involved? Well, I had put down a theory. I wrote down a theory, and that's when I realized that all of the kids that have been molested on purpose. That's what makes it so sinister. They've been molested on purpose. Okay, you have a child, he's molested. He grows up, he's going to become one of two ways. He's either going to be strung out because he can't handle what happened to him. Drugs, drinking, just, can you blame him? Mentally, the trauma that happens to you, you can't recover sometimes. And it's understandable. But then there's the other side of the coin. They become the overachievers. They go on to become doctors, lawyers, journalists, newscasters, whatever. And then one day, the Watchtower comes to you and says, we want you to do us a favor. And you say, well, I can't do that. It's unethical. It's wrong. Well, you wouldn't want someone to find out about you and think of it. It'll destroy your business, all that you created, the scandal, and the person bows down and does what they want. That's how the Watchtower works. That's how they really work. And what they can't do, they rely on Masons to do it for them. The Masons are the foot soldiers of the Watchtower. They take care of the dirty work that they take care of the dirty work that the Watchtower doesn't want to do. And that's kind of how it works. And everybody has a little piece of the puzzle, but you have to step back and look at the whole mosaic to see how it works and how it comes together. But that's why they're willing to not give up that database, because it's a resource for them. It's how they build generational control by the trauma. I wrote that document describing that, and that's when all hell a second time broke loose. They were livid. They wanted to know first how I figured out the RBC. They wanted to know who wrote the document. And I talked to a sister in the congregation, and she said they were on the warpath. They were told to question anybody, get the information, find out who did this, because they thought someone was leaking the information to us. But it's just because of my experiences of being inside. I just knew crime followed a certain logic. And I knew if it has this component and this component, then it must also have this component. and this component. And that's how I was able to rebuild. And I was speculating, but the judge said, write your theory of what you think is happening or what you think they're doing. And that, it really exploded. And that was like they were trying to force the case closed. And not long after that is when they just, I mean, I don't know if they walked in with a briefcase full of money and said, you know, sabotage this case. But, yeah, because I had accused of Tolbert of being paid off. And it wasn't until years later that I realized she was an Eastern Star, female version of Freemasonry. And then I got to understand more and more how the Watchtower works closely with Freemasonry. And that's kind of the thing, you know, it's all right in front of your face, but nobody connects the dots together. And, you know, I'm thinking, you gotta see this, you know. So after our case was dismissed, my brother filed a case, because we were trying to, again, get someone's attention at the headquarters, because we thought, oh, these are just a handful of bad brothers who are doing fraud and corruption. But at the headquarters, if we could get to someone, then they'll change this. Yeah, so we thought. I can hear you laughing, Mikey. Yeah, I mean, yeah. Well, he filed a case, and he filed a subpoena for certain records. The records that we couldn't get, because see, they threw the case, and the clerk said, you know, signed the judge's signature, because he knew if he didn't, and he didn't produce those records, she was going to make a court order. So his back was against the wall. But anyway, we ended up getting some records when my brother filed the case. And he comes and knocks on my door one morning, and he says, John, will you take a look at these bank statements? And I'm like, okay. I said, you're the smart one. I mean, what could I do? He said, well, just something's wrong with these, you know, just look at them. I said, okay. And they sat on my coffee table for 3 days, because I figured my brother's smarter than me. If he can't see what it is, I'm surely not going to try. And but I told my brother I would look at them, so you know, I had to look at them, you know. And it took me about 15 minutes to realize they were laundering money.
So this is about the time you probably want to pause it and go get some more popcorn and iced tea. Yeah, he has the receipts. And thankfully, his brother Jason was able to get a lot of the bank documents. And this is when it's going to get real interesting. So stay tuned.
And yeah, and that's what you'll find a folder, Hero Quada. Okay, now the story on Quada is this. He was not associated with Jehovah's Witnesses. He didn't even know who Jehovah's Witnesses were. When I researched his background, I could not see a tie. Okay, he was in the hospital. He was dying of something terminal. He dies. And supposedly there's no will, no nothing. And, you know, and if you die intestate without a will, then the municipality can take over your assets, your funds, and pay off any debts, or when you die, you know. And it seemed strange, but when my brother requested a copy of the will, he just asked out of curiosity. There was a will on file. So if you have a will on file, how do you, well, you have a copy of the check, but if you look in the top left corner on the first page next to the stamp that says Department of Justice, you'll see it's issued from the Bank of Santa Clara County. But yet there's a will on file. And everyone that handled that check is a Jehovah's Witness. There were 6 people that handled that check. They're all Jehovah's Witnesses. The check was issued to Dave Richards, as you can see his name. He was a part of the Cupertino congregation. He took the money and then wired it to Pennsylvania. And I couldn't track it after that. But that's clearly your case of fraud. So I've given you 1 case of fraud, 2. Kohler telling everyone he's a Navy SEAL and seeking monetary gain, and he's proven to be otherwise, and he had to have, or someone at the Watchtower had to have known the truth, and then of course this check now, because the fraud is in the county office. Is the will on file? And if there's a will, then how are you issuing money off his account? Because you can only do that if he dies intestate, without a will. So, and everybody knows this. Everybody knows this. They've been spending the last 15 years covering it up. Everybody knows this. So, I mean, I did all I could to report this crime, but everywhere I went, people were more interested in covering for the Watchtower. So when this came up about this lawyer and this case, I thought maybe now's the time to try.
I'm going to break this up right here and stay tuned for part 2.